Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the late edition of Conversations with MM. I'm Marivir Montebon here in New York City. We have a very important episode. This is about the CSW side event in commemoration of the 69th session and the Beijing +30 platform. I was able to attend this forum at Harvard Club in the city, and they had the forum had a panel of veterans of the 1995 Beijing Platform of Action. Now, how important is this? In 1995, the gathering of women, which was like about 50,000 women all over the world, they went to Beijing and articulated the rights of women. Women's rights are human rights, and so these are substantiated in terms of gender equality, economic rights, the right to live peacefully, and to be safe and protected during wars and calamities. So these are just the wide range of topics on the international accord that the women were discussing. So this is a build-up. They met in Copenhagen, they met in Nairobi, Kenya, to further articulate these philosophies and programs of action. So Beijing 1995 was crucial in articulating and putting forward the government's responsibility to set up policies and programs that protect women and children. So our guests are big time. They're such contributors to the Beijing platform. And I'm so happy and lucky that I was able to go there. Now, the forum is titled 30 Years of the Beijing Platform for Action, Looking Back and Pushing Forward. This was on March 14 at 9:30 a.m. until noontime, and the speakers were from different countries. Miss Selma Ashipala-Musavyi. In 1995, Selma Ashipala-Musavyi served as the rapporteur to the preparatory committees on behalf of Africa and the chairperson of the working group on gender. So she's a very important person in that conference, and she was at Harvard Club to shed her memories and insights into the Beijing +30. And there was Carol Bellamy. In 1995, she served as the executive director of UNICEF during the Beijing Fourth World Conference on Women. And Charlotte Bunch served as the executive director of the Center for Women's Global Leadership, where she was a prominent figure at the Beijing Fourth World Conference on Women. And there's also Patricia Espinosa. In 1995, Patricia Espinosa was part of the Mexican delegation to the Fourth World Conference on Women. She contributed to the working group on the political declaration of the conference, with over 40 years of experience in diplomacy, multilateral negotiations, and international relations. Also, there's Patricia Licuanan, our very own Filipina. Patricia Licuanan served as the chairperson of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women during the preparatory process of the Fourth World Conference in Beijing. In 1995, she chaired the main committee, which negotiated the historic Beijing Platform for Action. So I have a picture with Patricia just before the forum started. So it was good to see her. And she's still up and about. She was like she's now over 80 years old and still very agile. That was my impression. And also, here's a picture of the other Patricia, Minister Patricia Espinosa of Mexico. And here we go. And another speaker is Gertrude Mongella. Gertrude Mongella in 1995 served as the Secretary General of the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. In this pivotal role, she helped steer the conference's historic discussion on women's rights and gender equality. And last but not least, Yoon. In 1995, Yoon served as on the NGO Forum Organizing Committee, where she coordinated regional networks and facilitated the NGO amendments document on the Beijing Platform for Action. She is the UN representative for the International Alliance of Women and the author of Citizen of the World. And she is based in the US. Okay, so these are the power women during that forum at Harvard Club. And this was organized by the Asia Pacific Women's Watch, Cities for CIDO, History and Futures Project, Southeast Asia Women's Watch, Sea-Watch, and the UN Women. So I'd like to share with you the forum. It first opened like casually. The venue was packed, ladies and gentlemen. Take a look at this. It was packed and women were happy, chatting. You know, as usual, women are like excited. The room was filled with excitement. It's the Biddle Room at the Harvard Club. And they were like, it was also a sort of reunion. There were young and old people in the room. And it was an exciting, it was an electric time during that morning of March 14. So let's take a listen. The first presentation that I will give is the reading of the inspirational message by former Secretary Hillary Clinton and former presidential candidate of the U.S.
Emerged from Beijing was a global network of sisters. Sisters represented by those of you here today. And what you have done has echoed across the decades. In my ensuing travels as First Lady, as Senator, as Secretary of State, from large cities to small villages on every continent, I have heard my own words repeated back to me by women from all walks of life who believe in the truth and power of my simple assertion: human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. 30 years after we gathered in Beijing, the world is sadly an even more dangerous place for women and girls, and the platform for action remains far from being completely implemented. And so, as generations of women have done before us, we must look to the future, undaunted, and reconnect to doing the work that will help us in our countries and our world to move forward. I say, after that need to protect and advance women's rights and opportunities, I always say it is the great unfinished business of the 21st century. Amen. Today, let us remember, let us celebrate, but tomorrow, let's get back to work. Onward, in solidarity, with good cheer and warm regards, I am sincerely yours, Hillary.
Thank you, Melan, and thank you, Hillary. We will always remember that, and that is true. Wherever we go, those words are repeated. They are so associated with Beijing, right? Yeah. Women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights. Well, I know that the first question Gail was planning to ask was, we'll ask on the panel, how did you feel the very moment when the Platform for Action was finally approved at 4:45 in the morning? What is your most, or in other words, what memory stands out about the Beijing Conference for you? So we're going to do this really conversation style, no prepared statements, just a chat among us girls.
Okay. What did I do that morning? I finally exhaled. For 2 years, I have to say, I wasn't breathing. I was holding my breath. So Tati had mentioned that I was, there are only 30 of us in that one-room office on 43rd Street, trying to organize 30,000 people at the NGO Forum. And my job, since I was with the Secretariat of the Second World Conference, was to liaison with the UN, particularly on the platform, and to help coordinate the regional networks that were appearing. We had 250 organizations in the planning committee. Charlotte's group at the time was one of those, but we had FemNet. We have some of the most extraordinary networks that had not been together. They produced at each of the 5 regional NGO forums, NGO amendment documents. And that's why I was holding my breath, because as Tati mentioned, gender appeared as the most controversial in all of them, not only among governments, but also within the women's groups. We have to remember that gender was a fairly new concept also to a lot of women, that the social construction of our roles was to be the core message of the Beijing Platform for Action, the freedom that it would allow, and also the human rights part. Because the human rights part was brought in, of course, from Vienna, from the Human Rights Conference, but it was not clearly in the Nairobi forward-looking strategies. And I counted the number of times that human rights appeared in the Beijing Platform for Action, 300 times, in every section of those 12 critical areas of concern. And that was a great victory. So that's why I exhaled. When finally the NGOs got together, at the end, of course, in this process with the regional documents, we had to bring it all together at a 3-day meeting. I think Charlotte was there, in the Girl Scouts Convention Center, upstate New York. We had a final editing committee of 12 people, and then there were the 3 of us, Zoni Woods, Joanne Sandler, and me, who had to kind of bring it into a smooth process. At the end, we had one NGO amendments document. And dear chair of the CSW accepted that and helped us make sure that that moved into the process. That is the document that you see today. And the reason I wanted to elaborate on the process is to elaborate on how many voices and how much effort and how much movement had to go into that for 3 years, including on the part of Secretary General, who, as I recall, actually visited every province in China for a number of years, meeting with the All China Women's Federation groups to make sure that China, 1/3 of the world's women, was also going to benefit from this conference.
I want to follow up on Soon Young's point, because my first reaction to the question was, how did I feel at 5 a.m.? Well, I think somebody had to wake me up, because we were all lying on the floor behind where all the delegates were, waiting for this to happen and taking turns sleeping on the floor until it happened. And I just felt relief I could finally go back to my hotel room and go to bed. And of course the rain. None of us can forget the rain and the mud, because according to the Chinese, too many women menstruating in one place caused all that rain. There are a lot of really interesting memories of it going. But my most outstanding memory really does connect to what you just said, Soon Young, and to what Hillary's important speech spoke to, which was the moment when a group of us in the rain who had been in Vienna at the World Conference on Human Rights, brought over 1 million signed petitions from women around the world, some of them signed with thumbprints. All of this before petitions were on the internet. So if you're too young to know that, let me show you some pieces of paper that people signed and passed around and posted and sent through the mail. So at that time, we were bringing petitions that we had done for Vienna, and we had continued to Beijing, demanding that the conference address women's rights as human rights, and particularly violence against women as a human rights issue. And it had been partially accepted in Vienna, as Sun Young said, the notion that women were a key part of human rights. But we wanted Beijing to really put the final stamp on that. So through the rain, about a dozen women from different parts of the world carried these boxes of signatures and petitions to the press conference that was being held by the High Commissioner for Human Rights outside. In Vienna, we had delivered them to the floor of the conference, which was really the most dramatic moment. But for some reason, I don't know, Gertrude, maybe you didn't want them on the floor of the conference. But we delivered them to the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who was having a press conference about the conference. And it was that culmination of what not only we had been doing as the Global Campaign for Women's Human Rights, but also what Bella and we had been doing at the World Conference Summit in Rio, and what many women had been doing in Cairo at the Women's Caucus to make sure reproductive rights were framed as human rights and not just as a question of some, incidental medical matter. You could talk more about that, Carol. And so that was really my high moment, was seeing that all of these things that had been bubbling up through the 90s, really from Nairobi, 85 onward, meant that there really was a global women's movement. And I think it was born in Nairobi, but it came to the public and fruition in Beijing.
I think we need to contextualize the Beijing conference in terms of time. The Nairobi conference took place in the thick of the Cold War, and the Beijing conference was held in the aftermath of the Cold War, ushering in a new era of hope. I remember at that time we had what we call the UN major conferences. We successfully had the Rio Conference on Environment, followed by the Conference on Social Development, etc. So there was this new reaffirmation of hope and trust in multilateralism and in the United Nations, and I think women felt that we had an opportunity to basically put issues to the fore that we thought were basically advantageous to the advancement of women. That's one. At the same time, the preparatory process for the Beijing conference was crawling, starting from the regional preparatory conferences up to the global preparation itself. Patricia talked about the contact group on gender. How do you discuss women advancement? How do you discuss women's human rights and you don't have consensus on the concept of gender? Now, in that morning, sitting there in that plenary room, I was hoping and praying that first of all, member states will minimize their reservations on the platform for action, and that no country will garner courage to reopen what we have agreed upon, and hoping that Patricia will gavel down so that we can deliver that platform of action, ushering in a new era of hope, a platform of action that basically put women at the center of human rights, delivering a new world. So that is what was going through my mind in that morning when we were about to adopt the platform of action, and I'm glad that we did.
So
Thank you very much, Patricia, and hello everyone. And let me just say that I feel very, very honored to be sitting here along these women that played such outstanding roles in different areas to put together the successful outcome of Beijing in 1995. At that time, I was a young Mexican diplomat. I was part of the Mexican delegation. The Mexican, one of the Mexican leading figures there, an Ambassador Pellicer, she was asked to, Olga Pellicer, she was asked to conduct the negotiations for the political declaration. And so I was almost the last member in the delegation. So I was told, okay, you will support the ambassador and you will be helping her in getting this declaration done. And that was my role. So as you can see, very modest role. And I feel so honored to be with these great women here that have actually really led a movement that I would say we would very much, it started in Mexico, but I would say that we would very much benefit, the world would very much benefit if it could initiate a movement like this again. As you are seeing, we really have here a very good example of what multilateralism means, what cooperation, and what the willingness to really get together and find ways of setting an agenda that brings us forward as humanity, taking into account all the differences and all the different realities, different opinions and different realities. I remember, for example, in the Mexican delegation, there were some members that were advocating for, also the rights for LGBT community. There were also the groups that were advocating for the right to life, meaning, women should not, women cannot take a decision over a body that is already on the way. You can imagine the amount of discussions that were going in there in a delegation of 59 women and 1 man. And that was the head of delegation. That was the head of the delegation. He was the head of the delegation. Terrible. So I really think that I'm saying this because and I did want to share this with you, but listening to Hilary's message and listening also to my colleagues here, I think this is a moment of reflection. Yes, we need to celebrate because that was really outstanding. I think this is one of the big contributions of the United Nations to humanity, and there is still, unfortunately, we're still not there. So I think we need to realize that this kind of movement needs to happen again. It's not happening. We are losing the fight against those who are advocating to go back to those rights that were hardly won in Beijing and that are there in the Declaration and Platform for Action. And I'm just so really grateful to all of you because I can see that all of you, each one of you here, is absolutely dedicated and committed to this agenda. So I would, for example, what is happening now in the Commission, and I have to say I'm not following it like very, very closely, right? But I do know that in the negotiations, what is the Commission doing? It's doing negotiations on very specific issues, but there is not this big push from a global movement in there. I can tell you, I was heading the UN Climate Change Secretariat for 6 years, and I was also Foreign Minister of Mexico for 6 years. And I can tell you, this is not something that happens. I mean, we have to fight it every time. In the negotiations, regarding climate change, we are again questioning whether any reference to gender should come into the documents on climate change, while we know that women are especially affected by climate change. So why would we not allow those mentioning? So the argument that is being heard is, no, this is distracting our work. We need to concentrate on climate change, not on women. It doesn't make sense, you know. So I just wanted to say this, and I do hope that we can find some strong, energetic young women that will take the torch and will renovate and relaunch this ambitious movement for the rights of women.
And bring back the passion. The head of the Mexican delegation reminded me I was going to apologize to all of you for being in this very patriarchal room. Portraits all over the place. Charlotte, you would call it patriarchal, right? Anyone else?
Harvard.
I actually want to follow up on something that you said, because I wasn't that involved in the lead up to Beijing. I had just literally come to UNICEF in May of 1995, and so I was representing UNICEF at the meeting. Most of my focus on gender issues had been domestically here in this country, and happily broke a couple of little glass chairs, maybe. Maybe not a ceiling. I mean, I was the first woman elected citywide in this city, so that was nice. I do want to put also Beijing in the context of the 90s. It was one of those really important meetings. There was the environment meeting in Rio. There was the women's meeting in Cairo, as you mentioned. There was Beijing. There was the social services in Copenhagen. And they led to really a global acceptance and a global agreement around global goals, which built into those goals gender-based goals. Not always pursued as strongly as they should have been, but the Millennium Development Goals included a number, from girls' education to maternal mortality, although that one kept falling off the list. And then led to the Sustainable Development Goals, which also built in peace and security, understanding, again, both the critical role of women and also the impact of peace and security on women. And so, it was the fourth World Cup. So as you pointed out, there had been work that had been done before, but this played a major role in kind of globalizing these issues. The only problem was, in the follow-up meetings, while there were advances that were celebrated, the follow-up meetings they kept taking things off of the agenda. And to the extent that we find ourselves in 2025 trying to find the agenda, but I think Beijing has to be seen in that context. It should be seen as a separate in its own, because it played such a major role. But I think it needs to be seen in this broader globalization of the agenda, because without it, I don't think it would have been integrated into these global goals.
Thank you very much, Patricia. You're a great woman. And you must really, I must apologize if I ever stepped on your feet, because we are really running for the declaration. And it came because you had a great contribution. I would like also to say, I think we should appreciate our Chinese host. It wasn't a joke to have over 50 people in Beijing at the same time. 50,000. And if it went to some small countries, that would be over the natives of that country. So Beijing, we have to clap for Beijing. Day and night, I remember, to create the space for the NGOs, space for the government, and to make sure we are safe. Yeah. I don't think at this moment I can be as confident in any country, because with so many issues we have to battle with. Traveling at that time was better than today, was safer than today. So for the Chinese, I always respect them for having accepted to host such a huge conference. Now I would like to say, you see, in Africa we talk better when we tell stories. There was somebody yesterday who reminded me my story of the tortoise. But today I'm not going to talk about the tortoise. I just want to say that when I was at Beijing, I didn't remember which religion I belonged to. What was my faith? Because I had so many people I worked with from different denominations. And I didn't remember which political party I belonged to. Because there were thousands of political parties. And when I went back, I had so many friends from the opposition parties, and they used to wonder what am I doing. I said, in Beijing, I met so many people with many parties than the few 20 parties we have in Tanzania. I didn't remember what color I was. Because we are black, yellow, brown, whatever, pink, whatever color you wanted to have. So I became, for the first time, a global citizen. I have kept that spirit of a global citizen. And I remembered the philosophy, the Bantu philosophy. I think some of you have heard about it. We believe it's in Africa. We believe that you are because I am, and I am because you are. At the end of Beijing, I said, I think we have really implemented the Bantu philosophy. We were because I was because you were, and you were because I was. And that's why we succeeded. When people tell me, Mama Mongella, you are great, I say, I'm not. We are all together great, because the contribution which was made by all of us, that's what we are. Now, I want to say, after I left Beijing, I remember we said everybody has to take homework. That was the conclusion. And I want to ask you a question. What have you done since we left Beijing? Don't ask other people what they have done. Before you ask what governments have done, what have you done? What have you done personally? I can answer that question. Very proudly, when I went back, I said, I have to go back to Parliament. Clap for me. seats which are given a slot for women, I went into the constituents to push out the men. And I succeeded. For 10 years, I've been representing my constituents, which is a group of islands in Lake Victoria. That is number one. Then what else did I do? I said, the Africa continent was formed, the AU formed, decided to form a Pan-African Parliament. And I said, what can I do? I said, I have to be a member of that parliament. Yep. So I was elected in my parliament to be among the 5 representatives of Tanzania in the Pan-African Parliament. Then before we went to Addis Ababa, before we went to swear in, the 5 of us met, all of them men, 4 men and myself. And we met. And they said, oh, we are going to have elections for the president, 4 vice presidents. And I said, I'm going to run. And this man looked at me as vice president. I said, no, I have outgrown those positions. The president. And they all laughed. President? I said, yes, I'm going to be the first president of the Pan-African Parliament. And I put in my name. It went there, it arrived in Addis Ababa, I think just a few minutes before closing. So this man who couldn't believe it, when we were sitting in that after swearing in, then a young man from Nigeria came, said, Madam, do you have your CV? I said, yes, I do. So I gave a copy, and this is the meaning of being prepared. I had several copies, so I gave him a copy. And that young man stood up and talked about Gertrude Mongella and the Beijing Conference and all those things. And the women from all the regions, they were saying, because of Beijing. They had been to Beijing. So they clapped and cheered, and then, yes, one by one, they were all men. They said, I'm not running. And they had to vote a yes or no. Presided the president of Mozambique. And I won. I got 166 votes. And yes, and the other, and then I got also 20 no's, which is good. So I have been going on like that. I became the first woman speaker of the Pan-African Parliament. I just want to show you how we have to do that. And now the young people, when I talk to them, they believe me. But don't talk to young people when you've done nothing. So you still owe me the answer of what you have done, so that when we talk to the young people, they can believe in what we are saying. We have to do that, the homework. I shouldn't talk much, but I want to say I'll become a global citizen. I don't know my color. I am the girl from the dark continent, but now it's getting brighter than the world thought of. And I think together you are because I am. Thank you.
So I think that the platform is facing serious problems in terms of resourcing, and it's kind of been eclipsed by the Sustainable Development Goals, because the Beijing 12 critical areas has been interpreted in terms of Goal 5 of SDGs. And I say no, the SDGs are very important. Goal 5 is of course wonderful, but we have 12 critical areas, don't forget that. And that was a 3-year process. Every region had its own platform for action. So the concerns of the regions all went into those 12 critical areas. So every one of them is important. You cannot subsume all of that into one sustainable development goal. So I think we need some more visibility for the Beijing Platform for Action. In so many words, just go over the 12 areas again, and how can you eliminate any one of them? They're all very important. And we have to believe that with all our hearts, because we worked so hard on it, and so we can't just let it slide into oblivion.
Final point, which is backlash. I mean, we are facing a very well-organized, very serious backlash against the feminist and human rights agenda. And in some ways, I think adding feminism and sexual rights to the agenda, which we succeeded in doing in the 90s, has fueled even more backlash against human rights overall. So we are at a moment where there is very real opposition, very well-organized, well-funded opposition to those agendas. We see it in the United States in the election of Trump most clearly, but we've seen it in many other countries as well, where very clearly anti-gender agendas, Trump wants to take gender out of all the vocabulary in the U.S., and we know that there were predecessors in Hungary and other places who led the way in getting women's and gender studies out of their countries. This is not a small movement. It is a very well-funded effort. I believe that we represent more what people want, but they have the money and they have very good communication skills and they know how to manipulate the political systems. And they are using the UN the way we did 25 and 30 years ago. So we have to up our skills and our commitment, not because the glass isn't half full. We've made amazing things happen in this 30 years, but we also have to defend it and move our ability to put these on the political map in a very difficult time when there is a very well-organized opposition. So what have I been doing? I'm not
that there's a terrible backlash. Fourth, I agree, we still need to keep the spirit alive. It's Friday morning in New York. I thought nobody would show up. Look at this room. And I don't think any element of the agenda is more important than another, but I'm going to talk about one that I think is really important. And so something that if I could only do one more thing in my life, for the rest of my life, and I intend that to be quite a while, I work on girls' education. Yes. So I want to talk about that for a moment, and then I want to come to COVID, because I think COVID's had a big impact here. But again, over this period of time, we've seen dramatic improvement in girls' education. The 90s began to see a closing of that gap, certainly for primary school. We did away with school fees. We still had book and stuff like that. But doing away with school fees, all of a sudden, everybody used to say, well, parents don't want to send their girls to school. They sent their girls to school. Yes, when there were school fees, they tended to pay for the boy and not the girl, but once the school fees, my goodness, girls showed up to school. We didn't have enough teachers, and they weren't learning very much, but we began to close that gap. And we know that the return on investment in girls' education is critical. She's more likely to be healthy. Her children are more likely to be healthy. She's less likely to be a victim of violence. Doesn't mean she won't be, but less likely because she can make better choices over her life. She's less likely to get married as a child marriage. Watch out for that word marriage that gives legitimacy to a child being taken. Her family maybe not going to be rich, but more likely to be financially stable. And then we started getting girls into secondary education, very important, because that magnifies this return on investment. And then COVID hit. And all kids, boys and girls. Oh, by the way, my view is if girls are going to school, boys are going to school, at least in most places. So it's not that I don't want boys to go to school, I do, and we have to work with boys and men.
Amen.
Absolutely. But COVID hit, and it had an impact on all kids, but particularly on girls, because there we saw a rising child marriage again. The girls were back out collecting the water and the efforts. And so the impact on girls' education, particularly not only from that, but from COVID, has been particularly dramatic. And the gains, so many gains that we've begun to make around the world really have been, we really had to scratch our way back up as a result of COVID. It wasn't easy for the boys, but it's been harder for the girls to get them back into school. But I want to make an argument for an investment, whoever has the money, all of us, investment in girls' education, and to listen to young voices. I love this room. There are a lot of young people here, although there could be more young people here. But remember, when Beijing existed, 1995, we didn't have social media. We need to be role models for the younger women, but younger women need to be role models for us too. So we have to listen, and I don't think there's enough listening going on today. I think there's still a bit of talking to without listening, and I think that modeling is a two-way street. I think we learn from each other. So again, I'm sorry to pull the COVID thing, because I think COVID made a few, it's had an impact in a wide range, but I wanted to specifically speak to the COVID issue for girls' education. But I wanted to talk about girls' education beyond that, because if we're going to make a difference, get that energy going again, we need the entire army of women, which includes girls getting an education.
For the future. And the first thing I would say, as someone who began my activism at a very young age, is you just get out there and do it. And you are doing it, and the safe houses was a great, the network of safe houses was a great example. You can look to find those of us in other institutions who need to hear about it to help celebrate it. But if I had waited in all the projects I did as a young person to be invited, I wouldn't have done anything. Because unfortunately, we're not as organized as just inviting. But we are, I think, most of us, very responsive to hearing about the ideas and the energy of young people. So just keep doing it, one. And I think that all the points that were made about education are very important, because young people, I consider my education over the last 30 years since Beijing has come from my students. Young people tell me what and how these issues are changing. And I think it goes to Sak's point about the ecosystem is changing. It's from young people that I learn about what's happening on the technological field, what's happening in all of those areas. So we do really need to open that space. And finally, act without fear. That's why I've been working so much on women's human rights defenders. It is collective security. We have to provide the security for each other. We cannot assume that the governments will take care of that. So the movement of all of the women's human rights defenders, in fact, most strongly in Mexico, is a very strong women's human rights defenders movement because there is a lot of fear, and activism brings fear because it brings violence. And the backlash is because of what we've done. So we have to defend ourselves because the good thing is we created a movement. It touched patriarchy, if you will. It touched patriarchy. And it has shared those who are dependent on those patriarchal structures. But we also have to build our own community defense of each other, the we, the I and you, and the we, all of that. We can't just wait for someone else to defend us. So build your vision, act on it, and help get your friends to create the security that will keep us all going. So much more to say, but I'll stop.
That was the CSW forum with the veterans of the Beijing Platform of Action at Harvard Club in the city on March 14. I hope you found that very enriching and historical. And it gave us a sense of how it was creating that Declaration of Women's Rights and Empowerment agenda. So we'd like to thank the organizers of that forum, CSW forum, because it, for me, it added inspiration to the ongoing struggle and movement for women's rights. And, you know, if you engage women, if you equip them with education and opportunities for lifting themselves up, it will lift the whole of humanity. Because women, we don't just think of ourselves, we in fact think first of our families, of our children. So I hope you like that episode, this episode, ladies and gentlemen, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep yourselves inspired, take care of yourself, and take care of each other. Bye for now, and have a good weekend.